Bridges are stronger when built from both sides.
Let's connect.
Let's connect. In the middle.
Hello, and welcome to Building Bridges, a show on the Greensboro Television Network that highlights ways members of the public and members of the Greensboro Police Department can connect with each other. I'm your host, Sandra Hughes, and today we're going to talk about a multi-billion-dollar industry that comes at the cost of individual freedom. Human trafficking is estimated to affect nearly 21 million people worldwide. But don't think this crime happens only in other countries or other places. Human trafficking is happening right here in our community. Today we're going to take a close look at human trafficking by talking with three people who are very familiar with this criminal enterprise. Let me introduce Detective Caroline Holliday, Greensboro Police Department Crimes Against Persons Unit, Mr. Joe McCann with World Relief Triad, and Ms. Chelsea Spohn with Abolition North Carolina. Welcome all of you to Building Bridges. So we're going to start by letting you say what it is you do in your unit as a way of giving our audience a chance to meet you.
Okay, sure. In my current assignment, we are assigned assaults, teenage runaways, and adult missing persons. And so how I got involved with human trafficking really was about 4 years ago. I was assigned two missing persons cases that on the surface appeared to be just two more frequent teenage runaways, which is often the case. But once I dug a little deeper, found that they were actually being sex trafficked, had been taken down to Charlotte and up into Virginia.
When you said assaults, you don't mean domestic violence, right?
No, that's a separate unit. We do mostly like shooting, stabbings, any aggravated assaults, simple assaults, cyber stalking, stuff like that.
Okay. Mr. McCann?
Well, among a few other programs, World Relief here in the Triad has an anti-human trafficking program where we serve survivors of human trafficking living right here in North Carolina. We provide case management services to them and help them through that process of healing and recovery. We also work to bring collaboration in the community, hopefully trying to be a part of a lot of groups that are around the state trying to address the issue of human trafficking, and then also bring awareness into the community and empower different local churches and groups and organizations around to bring care to survivors and bring awareness and prevention into the community.
Okay, let's hear about Abolition.
Well, Abolition NC actually began in 2008 as one of those groups that Joe was referring to that just, as you said, learned that that is something happening in our community and how were we going to respond to that. And we began partnering with World Relief and some other organizations. In 2015, we became a nonprofit so that we could fundraise because we became more active in providing resources for survivors so that they could be independent and hopefully not be re-victimized.
You know, I remember many years ago, I'm thinking almost like 15, 20 years ago, we heard about something like this happening, but we thought, nah. So has this been going on for a long time?
It has been. Oftentimes with human trafficking, I think people think of it happening in red light districts in third world countries. They think of the movie Taken, but it really is happening to young ladies and men, but mostly young ladies here. It's force, fraud, coercion. Prostitution is often used hand in hand, but when you think of the word prostitution, you think, well, that's something they've chosen. That's a lifestyle they've chosen. When really, if you can get to the bottom of why they have seemingly chosen this lifestyle, it may be better than what they have at home or what they've come from.
How easy is it for someone to take a young girl and force her into this?
I think that's what human traffickers are experts at. They are experts at finding a vulnerability and exploiting it. So that vulnerability could be that someone's a young girl who's really looking for some attention, some positive intention into their lives, and a trafficker could use that as an opportunity to exploit that that vulnerability. It could be an immigrant who doesn't understand the laws of the country, or maybe is undocumented. Any of those things could be ways that a trafficker is going to exploit that vulnerability to control them. And as was alluded to, it's not always chains it's not always locked doors. A lot of times it is.
But that's what we think, though.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's what we picture. But it's a lot more complicated than that a lot of the time.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is the trafficker goes after the person, not necessarily that the person goes and knocks on the door and said, I'd like to be in your group.
Right.
But typically, you know, the statistic for that has been reported of women entering prostitution, the average age is 14.
Oh.
That's the average age of somebody beginning. Is not typically that they decide on their own, this is a way that I'm going to make money. Usually they have met somebody who realizes that they have vulnerabilities, and that, you know, that individual really, you know, pretends oftentimes to be a boyfriend. You know, they'll lavish them with gifts, expensive gifts. They'll take them places and expose them maybe to travel and things that they've not done before. And it's typically down the road then that the young girl is told, okay, now I've provided these nice things for you, I've done all this, I need your help now, I need you to do something with me. Or unfortunately, they might be assaulted, pictures taken, and then they're told, okay, if you do not cooperate in what I'm asking you to do, prostitution, then I will expose these pictures to family, to friends, to school, to, you know, to church. And so they feel like there's nowhere for them to go. And so oftentimes they're victims and no one even realizes what's happening to them.
That's very sad. I mean, it's frightening. And I can imagine that a lot of the people you deal with who are in, not the traffickers, but are scared to death. Is that right?
Oh, they often are, yeah. And then if they're scared, but then sometimes they don't have anywhere else to go because the home that they've come from is often worse than, you know, traveling around and being with this guy. Yeah, they're having to do this really horrible stuff on the side and they're giving up all their profits, any money that they make, but it's better than the dysfunctional life that they've come from. Oftentimes there's a history of abuse. Like Chelsea mentioned earlier, sometimes if they come from maybe a seemingly good family and a good lifestyle, these traffickers will use it over their head as shame. And so they couldn't possibly go tell their parents that they have a really good relationship with because they're afraid of being found out. And
where do these traffickers come from? Who are they?
I think that'd be a good one for you.
Okay.
I mean, you got to take out, when we use the word pimp, I mean, that's what they call themselves. And you got to take out these like character cartoon, you know, thoughts of what a pimp looks like, because they are everyday men. They are teenagers to older men. I mean, they're every age in between. They are men in our community. They are high school kids, high school dropouts. I mean, you name it. That's what a pimp looks like.
So how does a person, not you, how does a person decide that this is what I'm going to do?
Well, unfortunately, there can be a lot of money to be made, and that is a draw. And you know, I often, we are a faith-based organization, and I personally am a Christian, and I look at human trafficking, and for me, there's two things. It's evil exists in this world, and there's a lot of money to be made. And for those two reasons, sometimes people will make a choice to exploit other people. And unfortunately, that's a common thing around the world, and we see it in a lot of different, manifest itself in a lot of different ways. But it is people who are looking out for themselves and want what they want, and so they'll be willing to do whatever it takes and exploit other people and not see the value of another person if it leads to them getting what they want.
So this is happening all around us, right?
And you know, you tend to hear more about sex trafficking, but there's also labor trafficking that goes on, where, you know, people are brought in to work in restaurants. It might be, you know, somebody that is an immigrant or not from this area brought into restaurants, but then they're forced to work and not given their wages, or they're told you owe us for rent and for groceries, and so they're always incurring a debt. So it can also be labor as well as the sex trafficking. And I think something else that Joe's talking about, the money to be made, there's also demand. I mean, unfortunately, you know,
what do you mean demand?
There's men out with the sex trafficking, there's men out buying buying young girls and seeking, that. It's very easy now with the internet to be able to make those connections and remain very anonymous.
I guess what's really getting to me now and listening to you is that this could be someone right next to me or someone across the hall from me or whatever it's happening to, and I don't know it. How do I recognize it?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it often is, and all of us talk to educators in schools, and they want to know what they can do. A lot of these girls don't even feel like they're victims, so they're not coming to school and talking about it. They're not coming to church and talking about it because they don't think that they're victims. But you definitely can. Frequent runaways. When I get assigned a case, it doesn't say human trafficking. It might be an assault. It might be, for me, it's most often the teenage runaways. And once I dig a little bit deeper and try to figure out why they're running away, they're running from something to something. And
does that make a difference in how you handle the case?
It does. I mean, there definitely can be different urgencies. Some of the frequent teenage runaways, they just want to run away for a couple of days and go stay with some friends because that's fun, and they don't like the rules that mom and dad are laying down at home. But these girls where I see some red flags, there's definitely a sense of urgency there.
Are they willing to talk to you about it?
Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. That's and so actually, when I started partnering with both of these groups, but especially with Abolition, is if I can get them services, and they don't want to talk to me from a criminal report, I'll get them services all day long over pursuing something criminally, because really that's ultimately what they need. They need counseling, and they need. Oftentimes they're addicted to drugs, and so they need to get off drugs, and they need a better lifestyle than what they currently have.
It sounds overwhelming. I mean, you recognize it, but then the problem is come to do something about it, right?
Right. Well, it is overwhelming. I mean, the numbers are crazy, and the cases that we're even seeing. But at the end of the day, and I think for those who have come in contact with a victim of human trafficking and had the opportunity to meet them, it's what do we always say? It's a person. Yeah. So when it comes down to that one person,
even if it's just one, that's one that's not being victimized anymore, and that's good enough to do it. It's just even for that one person that's able to get out and experience restoration.
So are you feeling in the business that you do that this is a overwhelming situation, or is it just beginning to start getting big? Where are we now with it?
Well, I think we're definitely educating the community more about it, which I think is wonderful, and I think people will be more mindful if, for example, you were asking about signs. If you have a young lady that, all of a sudden isn't showing up to school for, some reason, or if there's a young lady that has expensive gifts that she never had or doesn't really have access, well, who's buying her these expensive gifts? An older boyfriend is often a sign. For labor trafficking, if somebody doesn't have their documented, their paperwork that they have a right to, or if they are not being allowed freedom of movement. One of the very first survivors that we ever met was a young lady that had issues at home, was kicked out of home by her parents, met an older man at her place of employment who took her in, and she talks about being at a doctor's office with him and him introducing her as his girlfriend. She was under the age of 18, and he at the time was 40, and she said, no one tried to get me by myself to talk to me, no one asked any question. And oftentimes I think in many ways we've become quite polite with one another. We don't want to ask questions that seem rude or difficult, and sometimes it's just a matter of seeing something that's not right. I mean, I have seen a young woman walking through the gas station parking lot, and a car, next to her talking to her, and you can kind of tell she doesn't want to talk to it. And I have got my gas and got in and pulled up next to her and asked her, "Are you okay? Can I can I call someone for you?" Or, so a lot of times it's doing that very uncomfortable thing.
But it's okay to do that.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you one thing. You all have certainly opened my eyes. I see this on TV, you know, and in movies and stuff like that, but it's actually happening in my community. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And the thing about human trafficking is it is a hidden crime. And so it's not something, we can learn the signs, and by doing that, we're going to hopefully see more victims being identified, but it's hidden. And so the problem is right now, it's a very small percentage of those out who are being victimized that are probably receiving services. And that's what we need to change. We need more of those people to be recognized, more of those people feel like they can come forward and receive help. And it's a hidden crime, so that's why we have to address it.
Okay, you've opened my eyes to that it's there and it's all around us, and we need to help these people. So when we come back in just a minute, we're going to talk about what do you do, especially in your organizations, to help them. Learned a lot about human trafficking, and I look forward to taking this deeper into this subject. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Building Bridges, a monthly show that brings together police and community members to make our city safer. I'm your host, Sandra Hughes. Now, before the break, we learned a lot about human trafficking, a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise that is often called modern-day slavery. Now, we're going to continue our conversation with our three guests: Detective Caroline Holliday, Greensboro Police Department, the Crimes Against Persons Unit, Mr. Joe McCann with the World Relief Triad, and Miss Chelsea Spohn with Abolition NC. Let's talk about the people involved in human trafficking. Before the break, we talked about what it is, who might be involved, and that kind of thing. But now let's dig deeper into it and find out more.
What more do you want to know?
There's a lot to know.
There's a lot to know.
Who are the, once again, you did say this earlier, but once again, who are the people who are becoming traffickers?
Yeah, the victims are just, there's usually just a need that's not being met somewhere. And so they are oftentimes somewhat easily coerced into it. And I think another important thing to talk about is how a lot of these females can get into this lifestyle and can get out, we can get them services, but then they seem to choose to go back into it. And I think that's a hard one, especially for law enforcement to understand, because we think, well, you know, you were in this terrible lifestyle and you got out and he was abusive and the pimp did all this and this. But it's hard to understand because if we don't understand their background. We really have to understand the victim's mentality on all this. I often use the term Stockholm Syndrome. You know, you don't understand how a person kidnapped can go back to their kidnapper. Domestic violence victims are the same thing. How do they keep going back to this abuser?
Well, can these young people just walk away to say, I've had enough of this and I'm gone?
I've seen cases of that. They're often so controlled though. They have access to a phone, and so we think, well, they had a phone. How did they not call 911? How did they not get away from it? But they're so controlled that, yeah, you'll have this phone, but it's just to do these things that I'm telling you to do. If you try to call anybody, you know, I'll do this, this, or this. So they're usually very controlled with all of that.
It sounds like it's a very sophisticated setup. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, a human trafficking victim or survivor could be anybody. So it can be a young kid who's you know, has problems at home and is running away. It can be a kid from the suburbs who, I mean, I know of a survivor who from the suburbs did very well, went off to college, was doing some modeling, and ended up a victim of human trafficking.
So it's not just people who don't have anything going on.
No, it could be anybody, and it's exploitation, and anybody. We all have vulnerabilities, every one of us, and traffickers find vulnerabilities and exploit them. So anyone could be a victim. Going beyond that, it's, you know, also not just women. It's not just children. We've had several cases of families that have been victims of labor trafficking.
The whole family?
Yeah, where there's the father or the mother or both are being exploited for labor trafficking, and some of them have been well educated. And there can be some shame around what they've experienced because, again, these traffickers, they're good at what they do, unfortunately. And so they find that way to exploit. And these are people who would have never, ever thought that they would end up in a situation like that.
Wow.
Sandra, I'll just say this because I like real life stories. I think that the statistics are great and talking about all these terms are great, but I really think people hearing about this for the first time can connect when you tell them a story. And so just briefly, one recently that I heard, just when you think you've heard every survivor story, a young lady who's now in her 20s has a very successful government job. When she was 17, she had started college early, very smart, come from a good family, but her mom had a very prestigious job. I don't remember what it was, but had a very prestigious job. And she was a smart girl, and she met a guy through work, and they would talk over the weeks, and he was traveling, and he said, I'm in town, and she went to meet with him. He said, well, I'm at this hotel, let's hang out, and then we'll go out. And so she met him there, feeling like she knew him, and as soon as she stepped in the hotel room, there were 3 gentlemen in there with guns. The door was shut and locked behind her, and in her mind, she's thinking, this is not really happening. Like, this is not my real life. And she was told, pick one of these guys to go with. And so she picked the guy that she thought she knew, and he took her into this lifestyle of prostitution that she would have bet money on she would never end up in, but she was threatened that we'll tell your mother and she'll get in trouble with her job.
Oh my.
And she had the kind of relationship with her parents where it was good, but she could go weeks at a time without talking to them. So every so often they would let her check in with them, and also her first experience with law enforcement was not good because an undercover officer came into the room and basically treated her like a suspect instead of a victim. And that's where we have to do better, and I think we have. We've got to do better treating these victims as victims and not suspects. They basically treated her as a prostitute.
So are they guilty of anything, the victims?
Oh, no. I mean, there can be a fine line because some of them, they do recruit other girls into the lifestyle. And so often law enforcement is faced with a very tough decision because, you know, they have knowingly done this, but they're also, again, you have to go back to the victim mentality. Why are they doing this? Well, they're probably trying to prove themselves to their pimp, or they're trying to prove that they're number one in charge. This girl actually was arrested for prostitution because she wouldn't give up her pimp's name out of fear. And when she was in jail trying to get out, she's never been in jail in her life. There were 2 girls in there that had been with very abusive pimps, and she was like, well, you should come with me because my pimp is not very abusive. Like, he's actually fairly nice. And so she called her pimp, called to bail her out, and she said, well, there's these 2 girls that I think they'll go. She thought she was getting them to a safer place, but unknowingly recruited them into that lifestyle. So,
you know, that sounds like a movie or something. Doesn't sound like what we deal with on a daily basis, right? So how can people who are not involved as victims or the pimps or whatever, how do we recognize what's going on, and if so, what do we do about it?
Well, I think if you do, you know, I think we all have those radars that go up. That's just not, that doesn't seem right. Or, you know, you see a male and a female together and there's not something, you know, quite right about that relationship, or it seems uncomfortable. And there is a national hotline number that you can call. Oftentimes you might have a very short period of time in which you're seeing the situation that doesn't feel to you that's comfortable or right. And I would say there's nothing wrong with calling 911 and letting the police know. You know, I'm observing this situation. It is. I believe that there might be somebody that's not being treated well, and will you come and check it out? And I know Caroline is aware of cases that where, you know, a police officer has gone and, you know, taken, you know, tried to separate the girl from the person she's with and have a conversation with them. So
just recently, actually, within the last month or two, a lady was downtown with her daughter, LeBauer Park actually, and saw something that just wasn't right. That's all she could describe to me, was that there just wasn't something right about this young lady who looked very out of it, and the two gentlemen that were with her. Now, they didn't kidnap, they didn't drag away, there was no gunpoint. In fact, they were helping her with water, but she did approach the young lady, asked her if she needed help, did she want to get away from there. She said yes initially, but ended up going with these guys. She did call 911, but it just took time to get the call through. Police couldn't get there in time, but she got a tag number. And so, you know, I was able to do some follow-up with that. And it wasn't exactly the ending that, you know, everybody wants to hear, that, oh, she came running to the police department and wanted a report, you know. But, you know, if that's all you can do, that's all you can do.
But
just
do something.
asking somebody at a gas station.
But you're saying do something.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So there must, what about these victims when they're out of these situations? What kind of help is there for them? Because they've got to be kind of out of it by then.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's several different agencies around North Carolina that serve survivors of human trafficking. And for World Relief, we provide case management services. So we have some funds available to assist them. And then we have staff caseworkers who work with them to kind of walk through that process. And it's going to be completely different for every single person, because everyone is coming from a different situation. They're going into different situations. They have different backgrounds, different needs. And so it's a very client-centered approach where we're really going in and saying, okay, what does this person need? Working with them to build a plan, for the future. And so immediately, you know, right off the bat, it might be just basic things like, okay, they need somewhere to sleep. They need some food and some clothes and just basic things like that. And then over time, it's positive relationships. It's thinking about whether they want to go to school or do they want to begin to work, counseling, just different things. We've had people who they want to do art, you know, like that would be a good outlet for them. How do we help them be able to get those services and begin to recover and heal from the experience that they've been through, become more self-sufficient, and see a future for themselves?
I'm sitting here thinking parents at home who might not recognize that my daughter, I'll use daughter, is not doing well and I might lose her. How do they recognize that, and what do they do about it?
Get on their social media accounts right now.
You mean
their
say
passwords?
Say it again.
Get on their social media accounts. Get their passwords. I mean, there comes a time where you need to know their passwords. You need to know everything about it, because social media is a huge issue, and where a lot of these young girls are just meeting complete strangers on the internet. Backpage is another.
Never heard of that.
Backpage is very similar to Craigslist. It appears to be a site for the sale of cars and apartments and homes and nice legal things, but there's several sections that are basically ads for prostitution.
So when your daughter starts screaming and yelling, "You're not treating me right, you're not letting me have a life," what do you do?
Yeah, I think that's hard for any parent, and I think you walk alongside them with that. You continue to put boundaries, because that's what we do as parents. And I think also be educated yourself about what this looks like, and share that with them. I will tell you that the North Carolina legislature passed House Bill 279, which mandated that there be human traffic curriculum provided in all the healthy lifestyle classes at school. And so your children are getting a brief snippet in school. They are starting to be educated about human trafficking. Now, of course, when they passed this legislation, there was not funds or the curriculum in place. So that's actually something that we have developed, that we have presented to the schools. We currently have that curriculum in Guilford County, Forsyth County, and Rockingham County. And we are working with others in the state so that we can have the same curriculum, so everybody is getting the same information, so that the teachers can have the tools that they need in order to be able to teach this. You know, we're also, I think all of us go to groups. I mean, if you are a parent and you want to know more about this, you know, you can call any of us, and we will come and do a presentation and talk with you, more about this one-on-one.
So, you were going to say something? Oh, what are you seeing now? Is this continuing to grow? Is it just steady? Is it we're losing some of it?
I mean, I just think the general public is becoming more aware. They're getting out of, like you said originally, you thought it was just in the movies in third world countries, and realizing what it really is. And really education is key, and just learning what it is and having those frank and honest conversations with your kids. I mean, they're getting it in school. You might as well have that conversation with them so you can be in control of that.
And what about from the organization you work with? Are you seeing things get better or still the same?
I think that, human trafficking is happening out there. I think we've got to address prevention and awareness, and that's going to be how we're really going to see it get better. But in the meantime, there's plenty of it happening, and it's really a matter, we need to start seeing more identification. We need to see more victims coming out of these situations. That's really the next step. We need to bring more prevention, more awareness, and we need to see more victims receive services. We're not anywhere near the end of, okay, there's no more victims out there to serve. We're not there. It's a beautiful vision for the future that we should strive for, but there's plenty more people who need to be served.
You gave a phone number a few minutes ago that we'd like to have you give out again. Which one of you was that?
That was the Polaris National Hotline, and if you call that number, then they take the information, and it's actually funneled to the county that's responsible for accepting the calls. And we have a group here in Guilford County that is made up of law enforcement and community partners with resources, and we are ready to respond immediately.
Well, I thank you all very much for opening our eyes. I'll tell you, I've learned a lot today, and I hope that our viewers have too, and they'll step up like you're asking them to do. Thank you for making us aware of this horrible crime that affects people right here in our community, because we thought it was somewhere else in the world. More importantly, thank you for helping victims of human trafficking and restoring their basic human right to freedom. For those of you watching, if you suspect someone is involved in human trafficking, alert authorities. Your call can be anonymous, and you could save someone's life. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Sandra Hughes. Be safe.
This show was funded in part by the Greensboro Police Foundation, an independent nonprofit organization whose mission is to enhance Greensboro's economic strength by promoting the safest city possible for its residents, workers, and visitors through support of the Greensboro Police Department. For more information about the Greensboro Police Foundation, visit www.greensboropolicefoundation.org.